You could have been at any other Fringe show tonight and you came to mine. I'm so sorry. If I would have known anybody was going to be here, I would have prepared. So I can't promise you that you're going to have a good time tonight, but what I can promise you is that I am going to have a good time tonight. And if you let yourself come along for the ride, then it won't feel like an hour of wasted time. It'll just be an hour of wasted time. So as we go through tonight, if you feel like crying, cry. If you feel like laughing, laugh. If you feel like singing, don't. A couple of years ago, I was sitting in the front seat of my car outside of the theater, and I didn't want to go in. I had seen a casting notice on Facebook, and I had emailed asking for a time slot, and they told me that they didn't have any left. But if I wanted to, I could come in between the hours of 5 and 10 and sit in the lobby, and if they had a time slot open up, then they would audition me. Now, generally, when theaters are casting for a show, they have a pretty good idea of who they're going to cast in the first place. Let's say you're going to do a predominantly Latino show, right? You want to make sure you have the Latinos in your community. Otherwise, your production of In the Heights ends up looking more like In the Whites. And nobody wants to see that. And I didn't want to go in. You know, I'd been to too many auditions where they didn't have any time slots left, but they told me that I could come in, wait in the lobby, and if they could fit me in, they would. But this one was different because they were auditioning for a Spanish speaker to play a Latino part, and you may not be able to tell by looking at me, but I am Mexican American. And the hardest part about growing up Mexican American in the United States is having to explain to people that I am Mexican American. You see, my full name is Sebastian Carl Smith. And you'll recognize that Sebastian Smith, the Smith part specifically, as not being a Latino name. It turns out it's my father's last name, and my father is white. The Mexican comes from my mother's side of the family, and my mother's maiden name is Klein, which you will also recognize as not a Latino name. It turns out her father is also white. You have to go all the way back to my grandmother, and her full name is Maria de la Luz Guadalupe Rodan Rodriguez Klein. And her maiden name, Roldan. It sounds vaguely Latino, but it's not. It's French from the Basque region of France, which is most famous for not being Mexico. You actually have to go all the way back to the indigenous people of Mexico to find the Mexican name, right? My family goes all the way back to the Tlaxcaltecan Indians, and the Tlaxcaltecan Indians are most famous for siding with the Spaniards to gentrify the Aztecs. And as a gift, they gave everybody in the tribe a last name. And so when they got to my ancestor, they asked him, you know, what do you like? What do you do? And he thought about it for a while, and he said, Duraznos. So they gave him the last name of Duraznito, or in English, Little Peach. Now, I'm 5'9", 6 feet tall on a good day, and about 220 pounds. I am spectacularly average. But I'm pretty sure that I am the largest person to have ever existed in my family, because Duraznito means little peach, and Klein also means little. Now, when I was growing up, my grandmother used to tell me if I worked hard and I got an education, I could be whatever I wanted to be, and I wanted to be the first black man to walk on the moon. And, you know, I didn't even get close. For obvious reasons, and since theater is a visual medium and you have eyes, you can tell by looking at me that I am bad at math. Like, I'm fine with the easy stuff, like 2 + 2 or 5 × 5, but if you ask me to take a squared plus b squared and find c squared, I get completely lost, because the only thing I'm worse at than math is spelling. And now you're asking me to do both. And if it weren't for autocorrect, I never would have gotten this show done. Now, I wasn't bad at everything in school. There were a couple of subjects that I was good at, like history and Spanish. And I was so good at Spanish. In high school, they kicked me out of class for being bored with the teacher. Now, I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household. I'm sorry that I'm naturally better at the one thing that you've dedicated your entire life to. If you really want to learn a foreign language, the best way to do it is to have your mom yell at you in that foreign language. Do you want to learn some Spanish? Yeah! Awesome. All right, so let's pretend that you've come over to my house for dinner and you don't like it, so you tell me that it tastes like a naughty word. In English, you might say something like, you kiss your mother with that mouth. But in Spanish, we would say, con esa boca comes. Or in English, you eat with that mouth. Or like, you're looking for a thing, and you ask your mom, hey, where is this thing? And she tells you it's in the kitchen on the counter. So you go in the kitchen and you look, and you don't see it. So she comes in and she points it out right in front of you. If it would have been a snake, it would have bit you. Not in Spanish. In Spanish, it's, ay, esos ojitos tan bonitos que no ven nada. Or in English, how pretty your eyes are. Too bad they can't see anything. Or like the one I heard all the time growing up. Para pendejo no se estudia. And this is something rude you would say to somebody if they're lacking common sense or if they do something that bites them in the butt. And it literally translates to, you don't study to be an idiot. Now, the other thing that I was pretty good at was history. So let's pick a random year. Let's say 1927. In January of 1927, the first transatlantic call took place from New York to London. October 6th, The Jazz Singer came out in theaters, ending the silent film era, and on December 15th, Maria de la Luz Guadalupe Roldán Rodriguez was born in Mexico City. Now, from an early age, my grandmother wanted to be a doctor, but the odds of a woman born into a poor family, in a poor city, in a poor country are astronomical. Almost as astronomical as me becoming a black astronaut. Which actually brings me to the first lesson I learned from my grandmother, and that is to dream big. Now, I'm not an astronaut. I'm an actor, and that's because of what my grandmother told me when I was growing up. If you worked hard and you got an education, you could be whatever you wanted to be, so I worked hard. I went to school, and I got my degree in theater. And I knew that upon graduation, I was totally prepared to be a waiter. I never understood why my grandmother wanted me to get an education. I just didn't care. Instead of going to school, I would rather get dropped off at my abuelita's house, because abuelita's house for the day meant popsicles, telenovelas, and after that, reruns of Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. And at the end of the day, when my parents came to pick me up, she would always remind me that if I worked hard and I got an education, I could be whatever I wanted to be. She loved education. She loved learning, and she wanted to be a doctor. But she knew that that was something that could never happen if you didn't come from doctors. There was just no way that you could afford it. So she looked into becoming a nurse and found out that one book would cost as much as her father made in an entire month. Now, my great-grandfather, Juan Roland Galvan, had a decent job at a hacienda owned by some Spaniards, and he was the mayordomo, which basically means he was the manager over the rest of the house staff at the hacienda. And when my grandmother was in the 6th grade, the Mexican government was going around reclaiming their land from the Spaniards, and because of this, my great-grandfather lost his job. So unemployed and uneducated, Juan Galvan had very few options for work. And one of the more lucrative options was to move north to the United States and work on the railroads. My grandmother was a very affectionate person. Whenever we saw her, it was always hugs and kisses. She never missed a moment to show someone how much she cared about them. And this was not the case for my great-grandparents. My understanding is that they never showed affection, that they were very stoic people. So as the money dried up and Juan Galvan prepared to leave, he kissed my grandmother for the first time, and he told her that when he got back, he would have more than enough money to send her to school all she wanted. And he rode away. It was like something out of a movie. My mother has a painting hanging in her house of a caballero, a cowboy in silhouette wearing a sombrero, riding a horse. And it's how my abuelita described seeing her father, Juan Galvan Roldán, for the last time. Because after 2 months of living in the United States and working on the railroad, he caught pneumonia and passed away. I was never really a good student. In grade school, my greatest achievement was when I got an A, a B, 2 C's, a D, and an F all on one report card in the same semester. For my grandmother, her greatest achievement was making it to the 6th grade. To me, school was a punishment, a prison. For her, school was an open door that led to opportunity. She understood the power that a good education could have over someone's life. Do you know what they call a med student in this country that finishes at the bottom of his class? A doctor. Sometimes, all you need is an opportunity. Which is the second point. Don't just get an education. Make your education work for you. So I went to college kicking and screaming. And going into college, I knew I had 2 things going for me. First, because of my mother's Latino heritage, I qualified for diversity scholarships. And second, because of my father, white privilege. I am the first person in my family to graduate with an associate's degree. Now, granted, all of my cousins have their master's or doctorates, but anybody can get an accelerated doctorate from UMKC, but it takes a real talent to get a 3-year degree, or to get a 2-year degree in 3 years. Now, at Maple Woods, they didn't have an arts program. They had a random assortment of classes, but nothing more than the bare minimum. So I did the next best thing and followed in the footsteps of my icons. And like Steve Martin before me, I chose to study philosophy. And I think philosophy might be the only course of study that worries parents more than a theater degree. What philosophy does is it teaches you to think about the questions critically. Like, what is life? Why are we here? What do the pellets in Pac-Man taste like? Are they sugar-free? Do they have gluten, and can I have some? But still, I wanted to perform. So I started taking classes and performing improv at Comedy City. Then I started a drama club on campus, and shortly after that, my father started telling everyone he knew that I was going to clown college. Now, my father is the first person to expose me to comedy, and one of my earliest memories as a child is going to the Mid-Continent Public Library with my father and getting a VHS tape of Duck Soup by the Marx Brothers, and I would love to tell you that story, but again, my father is white, and this is about Latino heritage. But to give you an idea of where I get my sense of humor, for my birthday, my father bought me running shoes and a pair of scissors, and he told me to do the math. Which I thought was really mean, because after 30 years, you'd think he'd know how much I hate math. Now, my grandmother came to the United States with 3 names and 3 phone numbers on a piece of paper. Her plan was simple: call each one and ask if she could stay with them. And years prior, she had been enrolled in a program to become a paralegal, but even that was almost still too expensive. She could only afford 1 piece of paper per day to complete her studies. Around the same time, she met a man named Octavio, fell in love, had 4 boys with him, and the only problem was they both had very different ideas of what they wanted in life. My abuelita wanted a job and to send her boys to school, and Octavio wanted her barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. Now, knowing that even with a good job, like being a paralegal, she would never have enough money to send 4 boys to school, and she made the decision to move to Monterey with Octavio. Because the only real option was to move to the United States. Because in the United States, it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter how much money you made. Everyone had the chance to go to school for free. What was special about living in Monterey was that in a border town, you could get your visa in only 5 years. But that wasn't good enough, not for Maria de la Luz Guadalupe Rodan Rodriguez. She had a superpower. Now, my grandmother was the type of person who could meet someone and talk to them like an old friend, and after 10 minutes, she would have their entire life story. One day, she became friends with a person who had family in Texas that worked in immigration, and because of that, instead of 5 years, it only took her 2 to get her visa. My uncles were sent back to Mexico City to stay with family. She called the first name on the list, which was a family here in Kansas City, and I assume it only took about 10 minutes for her to convince them to let her stay with them. And in the United States, she got a job at the first Mexican restaurant in Kansas City, met my grandfather, married him, brought my uncles over, and somehow found time to conceive my mother. There were some pretty obvious limitations, but she never viewed them as insurmountable. Instead, she embraced the person she was and found creative ways to move forwards towards her goal. Never underestimate the power of being a good person can have. And number 3, never give up. Now, I get my love of the performing arts from my abuelita. In her late 60s, she took up learning the guitar. She wanted to play in her church choir, and she was already singing in the choir, but she wanted to do more and contribute more. And hearing her play at such an early age really fostered a love of the performing arts for me. So much so that when I tried to learn the guitar, I found out that if I were a superhero, my only weakness would be playing the acoustic guitar. I went to 4 colleges, 1 year at UCM, 2 years at Maple Woods, a day and a half at UMKC, before finally settling on Missouri Western State University as a philosophy major, then as a comm major, and finally as a theater and video major with an emphasis in performance and writing, which in hindsight is probably why it took me 6 years to graduate. I really enjoyed my college years. Then during the first semester of my second junior year, something weird started happening to my body. The previous summer, I worked at Worlds of Fun, singing and dancing 5 to 6 shows a day at the Moulin Rouge Theater, and I was absolutely ripped. I was a lean 175, down from 200 pounds where I had started that season. But as the semester went on, I continued to lose weight, 5 pounds, then 10 pounds, 20 pounds. And one morning I woke up and everything hurt. All the color was gone from my face, and I was having trouble breathing. Each time I took a breath, I filled my lungs, but it felt like I couldn't get enough air. So I woke up my roommate, he rushed me to the ER, and they admitted me to the ICU at 135 pounds and a blood sugar that was too high to register on their machines. So I'm lying in this ER bed, and I can tell everyone is worried about me because they're asking me questions, hooking me up to machines, and when everybody left, my roommate leaned over and he asks, "Hey, did you see how hot your nurse is?" I'm lying in bed. I can barely breathe, and I've covered my eyes because the lights in the room are too bright, so I lean over to him and I say, "No, I'll check when she comes back in." The doctor comes into my room, and I ask him, how long does he think this is going to take? Because I've got class, homework, work the next morning, and 2 shows at Comedy City that weekend. And the doctor tells me, if you leave here, you will die. I was experiencing something called diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA. And DKA occurs in people with diabetes when insulin levels are too low and sugar is too high. And what happens is your body starts to build up ketones in your bloodstream, and it quickly turns toxic. It was at this time the nurse came back in and put an IV on me and an insulin drip, and she was okay. I wouldn't call her hot. Like a 7 at best, but what do I know? I was in bed dying. One of the symptoms of DKA is pain, joint pain, muscle pain, all over pain. So they gave me a shot in my arm, and I don't know if you've ever tried morphine, but I definitely recommend it. And as the pain subsided, I closed my eyes and everything went black. And that was it. There would be no work, no class, no shows. That could have been it. If I would have laid back down in bed that morning and gone back to sleep like I had planned, I would have died. That would have been it. I would have never finished my theater degree. I would have never done another show, and I would have never had the opportunity to make another person laugh. In the spring of 2004, before college, before high school, when I was in middle school, my grandmother had been sick. My parents were renovating their basement into an apartment so that my abuelita could come and live with us. I remember one night we went to my grandmother's house, and we used to go all the time on the weekends, but tonight was different because it was a school night, and when we got there, the driveway was full, and all of my uncles and my cousins were in our house. I asked my dad what was going on, and he told me, "Your grandmother is dying, and they don't think that she'll make it through the night." I went into her bedroom. The lights were off. She was lying in bed with eyes shut and breathing hard. each breath filling her lungs, but it sounded like she wasn't getting any air. I sat down in the chair next to her, holding her hand for a while. And I thought back to hearing her pluck out Mary Had a Little Lamb on the guitar until it was perfect. Every year at Christmas, opening up a present and getting a brand new package of socks. And playing hooky on a school day to eat popsicles, watch telenovelas, and afterwards, reruns of Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. And at the end of the night, I leaned over and I gave her a kiss, and I promised her that I would get an education. And that was it. That was the last time that I saw my grandmother alive. She passed away later that night. Now, life is different when you can look back at it from your deathbed. You get a new perspective on what matters and what doesn't matter. It gives you the opportunity to take inventory. It doesn't matter that my grandmother never became a doctor. It didn't matter that she was never able to play guitar in her church choir. What matters is that she never gave up. That she never resigned to being a 6th grade dropout who was barefoot pregnant in the kitchen, and that she always wanted to be more than she was the day before. Now, I don't remember much about my time in the hospital. I do remember that they kept trying to feed me fish, and I kept telling them I don't eat fish. But 3 out of 4 days, they brought me fish. It was the worst part of my near-death experience. 2 stars. And after that, the rest of college went pretty smoothly. After 6 years and $26,000 in student loans, I graduated with a degree in theater and video with an emphasis in performance and writing. And I had been auditioning around Kansas City since I was 16 years old with very little luck. Now, I would have some success with Comedy City and Worlds of Fun, but I just didn't have any luck getting booked beyond those 2 venues. And after graduation, I went on every audition I could find, and so a couple of years ago, I was sitting in the front seat of my car outside of the theater, and I didn't want to go in. I had seen a post on Facebook earlier saying they were casting for a new show, so I submitted an email, and they told me they didn't have any time slots left, but if I wanted to, I could come in and sit in the lobby between the hours of 5 and 10, and if they could fit me in, they would. But this one, they were auditioning for a Spanish speaker to play a Latino part, so I decided to go in because I am Mexican-American. In the lobby, there was nobody there, so I was able to go straight into the audition room, and I went upstairs and I handed them my headshot and I handed them my resume, and before they could say anything, I said, I noticed you're casting a Latino for a Spanish-speaking part. I speak Spanish. And they went silent for a moment. Then one of them looked at me and they said, you do? And I said, sí, puedo hablar español muy bien. And so they whispered a little bit, looked around at each other, and they said, can you sing in Spanish? And I said yes, and they asked me to sing Bésame Mucho. Now, asking if I could sing Bésame Mucho is like asking if white people like macaroni. Bésame Mucho is literally the most recorded Mexican song of all time, and it was one of my grandmother's favorites. Bésame, bésame mucho. And while I was singing, the director got up from the table and started dancing with me. And that doesn't usually happen. So I was pretty sure that I got the part. And after I was done singing, they had me read a couple of lines in Spanish, and then they had me read a couple of lines in English, and I left feeling confident. If the acoustic guitar is my weakness, then speaking Spanish is my superpower. My time in college taught me the techniques that I needed to be an actor, but my time with my grandmother set me apart from the crowd and taught me to follow through with my dreams and to really make them happen. A week later, I got a call from Rusty over at the Living Room Theater, and he offered me a part in Chainsaw the Musical. Not the Spanish-speaking part of the Latino, no. Instead, they offered me the role that they had originally written for a black actor and hired a black actor as the Latino and asked me to teach him Spanish. And since then, I've had the opportunity to perform at companies like New Theater Restaurant, Different Choices, Rising Tide, and I've done staged readings at the Unicorn. And I've even had the privilege of being flown out to Palm Springs, California, to Palm Canyon Theater to perform in a production of La Cage aux Folles, which I know sounds vaguely Latino, but it's not. It's French. And I want to leave you with a joke my grandmother told me. She used to tell a lot of jokes, most of which I can't tell you because they're insanely obscene. So I'll tell you the cleanest one that I can remember. Un francés, un mexicano y una muchacha vestida con una falda muy corta estaban esperando el camión. Cuando llega al camión, los dos galenes le dieron la pasa a la dama y al subir al camión, se resbaló la dama y se cayó para atrás. El francés exclamó, ah, se la vi. Y el mexicano exclamó, yo también se la vi. So I'm guessing most of you don't speak Spanish. I'll go ahead and translate it for you. A Frenchman, a Mexican, and a girl dressed in a very short dress were waiting for a bus. When the bus arrived, the two gentlemen let the woman go first and helped her up, and as she got onto the bus, she fell over backwards. The Frenchman said, c'est la vie, which of course in French means, oh, that's life. And the Mexican said, yo también se la vi, which in Spanish means, I saw it too. It's much funnier in Spanish. But the point is, there are going to be times in our lives that we fall down or things don't go the way that we want them to. And the only thing that we can do is get back up, laugh, and try to get back on the bus. Thank you.